Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode here on European Confessions. The following story that you're going to be listening to, it is a narration of a message that I received. The narration reads like this. Hello, my brother. How are you? Can you please post my own story as hidden identity? This story that I want to share with you, it happened when I was still very young. So my sister was the one who told me the whole family history. My parents, they have their own property, and please do not mention the place where my parents have their property. Well, I am staying in a foreign country. Whenever I return back home, whenever I am on my off days or holidays, I always go to my parents' house. But my parents, they never bought this house. There was actually something that was quite strange that happened when my father's boss passed away. My father then found out that he was now the new owner of that house, and for my father to become the owner of that house, a lot of charms and magic was used. So my father, he was someone who was just struggling. He then left the village. This was when we were still young, but my sister, she was quite old at that time, so she knows everything, and she saw and understood everything that happened. All the evil stuff that happened, it happened when she was already mature enough to understand everything that my parents and my grandmother was doing. My father left the village and he went to the city so that he can find a job, so that he can take care of my mom and his family. When my father returned back to the village, my sister said that on one occasion my father complained because he had once gotten this other piece job. There was a man who had picked him up from the street. This man, he was such a kind man, and this man, he died without having had. This man, he was such a kind man. By the time that he passed away, God had not given him a child yet. It was quite a sad thing, for he was a kind man. So this man who picked my father up from the streets, he then told my father that he wanted someone who could actually come and do some grass cutting at his house in the suburbs. My father then went there for the piece job. My father said that as he was busy doing his work, slashing the grass outside, then the wife to his boss then called my father, and she said that food was ready. And when my father went into the yard, my father then went and sat by the veranda whilst my father was waiting for his madam to come out of the house with the food. My father said that he waited and he waited and he waited for the food, but the madam never came out with the food. When my father looked at the time and he saw that he was behind time, soon the boss was going to return back from work and he wanted to impress the boss. My father then took his slasher. He then went outside and he continued doing his work, cutting the grass. Later on, my father said that when he felt that he was starving because he had not eaten anything and he was doing hard work, he then said, let me return back and speak with the madam, because I am now starving, so that she can give me the food that I have waited for a very long time and she didn't come out of the house with the food. Maybe she has placed it inside the kitchen and forgotten about it. Then my father walked back into the yard, and when my father went to that veranda where he had been sitting waiting for the madam to bring out the food, my father then said that he saw that the madam had actually taken the food out of the house and placed it on the floor, and the dogs, they had came and eaten all of that food. So my father, feeling very hungry, then knocked on the front door. Then the madam came out surprised, and then my father told the madam that, look, you just placed the food on the ground, and the dogs ate everything. I don't know what to do anymore because I am starving. I just need to eat something so that I can regain my strength and continue with my job. Then that lady got so angry at my father, and the lady said that I came out with the food, but you were nowhere to be found, so I left it here. It is your fault. Well, that lady then said that she was going to see what she can do to prepare some food for my father. Then the lady boss walked in back into her kitchen. When she walked out again, she was holding two plates, and one of the plate that was on top was covering the food. So my father thought that maybe there was nice food that was in there. My father sat down as he prepared to enjoy his meal, and when he opened the plate that was covering the other plate, to his surprise, he saw that there was nothing in there. It was just a few sweet potatoes that were as thin as tree roots. My father ate it anyway. He then went outside and he then started doing his job. My father did his job, and when the boss came, the boss was really impressed by my father, and he told my father that he wanted my father to work for him because he was such a hard worker. Then my father told my boss that he needed to come back to the village so that he can collect some items from the village, and he let my father to travel back to the village. When my father traveled back to the village, that was when my sister said that my father then spoke with his mother, my grandmother, about this issue, the way that he was being mistreated by that boss lady. Then my grandmother, here being a witch, she said that this was quite easy. She then gave my father some. She said that she was going to sort out that lady who was my father's lady boss, and this is what happened. When my grandmother went to the city, the story that we were told by our sister was that when they took my grandmother to the bus station, because at the place where people used to wait for the bus back in the village, you had to wait for a very long time before the bus would have arrived to pick you up. So my sister said that my grandmother, she acted as if she was actually carrying a child on her back, and by the time that the bus arrived, everything had just disappeared. That child that she was carrying on her back, it had actually disappeared. My sister then told us that my grandmother then went to the city, and upon her return, then that lady, she had a growth on her leg that was coming out, and she died. She had cancer, and that is how she died. After that lady boss had passed away, when she had been bewitched by my grandmother, then my father's boss got married again. He got married to his own secretary. Then my grandmother traveled back to the city again. We were told by my sister that each and every time that my grandmother will travel back to the city, she will always have ground nuts that she will be having. And my father's boss, he loved the type of ground nuts that would have been boiled, then dried up. And this is what my grandmother used to bring for my father's boss. And as for my father's boss's wife, she was also given some mealies, and these mealies, my sister said that they used to smell a lot, and they used to smell of herbs, which meant that my grandmother bewitched everyone. And by the time that this man passed away, that was when we heard that my father was the one who was actually written on the will as the one who was supposed to be given this house. What had happened is that my boss, one day, he had been taken by his boss, and he was taken to this other place where the boss said that it was the lawyer's office. But what actually my father was being made to do, he was actually being made to sign the papers to the house, and he was agreeing that he was now the owner of the house. So all of these documents, they only came out after my father's boss had passed away, and he had already made plans for his family to migrate out of Zim, even though he never had any children with his new wife, who used to be his secretary. As for me and my siblings, growing up, my father never paid for our school fees, because my father's boss, since he had been bewitched so much by my grandmother, he used to pay school fees for us, even though we never went to like your expensive schools. But anyway, he used to pay for our school fees. Dear listeners, right there was a narration of a story that was sent to me by one of our listeners.